Paper 3, Issues and Debates, Free Will and Determinism. So this is talking about how our behaviour is determined. Do we have free will, where we make the choice to act in a certain way? We choose our behaviour. Our biology, our environment is not important. We make the decisions ourselves consciously. Or is it determined by these three things: biology, environment, and our psyche, or our unconscious? So free will, in a nutshell, is just that. We make the choice. We decide what we do. It's very brings into account cognition, attention, perception. We decide what we're going to do when. Or is it that our behaviour is determined by our biology, environment, and unconscious? Now, if we talk about determinism a bit further, it's split into these two umbrellas: hard determinism and soft determinism. If something is hard determinism, behaviour is caused by events outside our control. Free will is a total illusion, and our biology, for example, will determine whether or not we will act in a certain way. Soft determinism is caused by a person's own character or conscious desires. If our actions are voluntary and in line with our conscious desired goals, then they are free. So it's basically like an example of soft determinism would be around sort of environmental, because our character, our conscious desires, we will then seek them out in our environment, but ultimately our environment will determine how we act. So these three are pretty self-explanatory, especially biology, environment, and environmental. Psychic, we only ever talk about with the psychodynamic approach. So our unconscious, think back about Freud, he says that everything we do is because of our unconscious telling us that's what we want. So if your question said refer to an example, for psychodeterminism, anything psychodynamic from gender, the approach in general, or from forensics, we can talk about as well. So task 1 in your booklet, then, we have a whole host of examples which are environmental, psychic, or biological. So pause that here. The answers there. And then we'll delve straight into our AO3. Now, because this is an issue, we're trying to weigh up between free will and determinism, and as well as that, we're trying to weigh up between how free will is important and how it's not necessarily true. So if we start with the evidence to support it, in our everyday life, it gives us this impression that we make choices every day. We decide what we're having for breakfast. We decide, where we're going to go at the weekend. Everything we do ourselves. So it does give this concept of free will face validity. So on the face of it, just by looking at it, it makes cognitive sense that, I decided that I'm having tikka masala for dinner. No one else did that for me. I made that choice. And if we think back to, social influence with our internal locus of control, people who believe that they are in control of their lives, they were seen as more mentally healthy. So actually, having this free will and being a confident internal individual with that locus of control means that you are going to be psychologically healthy. So it gives it validity. However, on the other side of that, we're going against free will. Now, this is a really interesting study by Lebet and by Sion Soon, looking at our brain activity using an fMRI, shows that basically simple choices are made before we decide to make that choice. So our brain will consciously decide what we are going to do before we actually act on it and do it. So actually, do we have free will? They would argue not, that everything in life is kind of set up for us, even Our brain decides what we do before we actually do it. Determinism fits in with the aims of science. The aim of science is to test, retest, to prove something wrong. The idea that human behaviour is ordered, it obeys laws, placed in psychology on equal footing with our established sciences. It's led to development of treatments. If we know, for example, that schizophrenia is biologically determined by dopamine, we can then provide people with antipsychotics that will alleviate or reduce the level of dopamine within the brain. So it does have a positive. But that hard deterministic stance, individual choice is not the cause of behaviour, is not consistent with how our legal system operates. So in a court of law, you are held responsible for your actions, and you can't go to the court of law and say, I killed somebody because I have the criminal gene, which is a thing. I have too much MAOA, which is responsible for aggression, therefore I shouldn't go to prison. Not going to happen, because you're still making the choice to do that. So it's not in line with how our system works, and it's unfalsifiable. It's really hard to kind of like hold that account, because when you try and falsify something, you're testing it until it's proven wrong. It's based on the idea that causal behaviour will always exist. They'll always be there, but they may not be found yet. So you can't say that it's definitely due to this, like biology, when it could be due to lots of other things. And like I've just said, it's impossible to prove it wrong. So it's not as scientific as it first appears. Pause this to have a look at this question. 6 marks with reference to the item. So we've got some AO2 here for 3 marks. Explain what is meant by determinism. So we're picking out from the STEM, biology, environment, and psychic determinism. And then to finish, and research methods, 8 marker and 4 marker. Refer to our features of science. Why is science deterministic? Thinking about replicability, objectivity, empiricism, etc. And then why the idea of free will is incompatible with the aims of science, okay? Because we can't necessarily test free will, because we just, it's our cognition, okay? Lovely.